Since the founding of Rome in the 8th century BC by its legendary father Romulus, the small settlement set within the boot of Italy had battled against all odds to ensure their presence in the world, struggling up the rungs on the long ladder of civilizational greatness, no longer a fledgling city-state fighting for survival against her regional neighbours, but a purple and gold-plumed eagle surmounting the globe. This Roman society, from Romulus to the fall of the Western Roman Empire, lasted over 1,000 years. The legends and successes associated with these centuries have no comparison in all of history, yet there was one achievement that was harder to obtain than either kingship, emperor status or consul. Rome had many emperors, hundreds of consuls and even 7 kings, yet just 3 men in all of history are recorded as having completed this ceremony in full. So why was it so hard, you ask? What trial could be so great that its hallowed halls of champions only claims 3 inhabitants, and one of them is the mythical founder of Rome himself? Well, now we should look at this ancient tradition, the men who inhabit this most prestigious club, and those who just missed out. For now though, know this. The initial and most important factors if you wish to claim this prize were as follows. Firstly, you must rise through the treacherous ranks of Roman society to become one of the most powerful men in history. You then need only exert total command over a Roman army, meet an enemy on the field of battle, kill their king in single combat, and strip him of his possessions and worldly goods where he lies. Once these small tasks are complete, you then must gain permission from a jealous and spiteful Senate to recognize you as one of the greatest Romans since their mythical founder himself. Sound easy? Well, let's see who the great men who achieved this historic task were, shall we? The Spolia Opima, or rich spoils, is the exact sort of concept it's easy to imagine the Romans would dream up, a society that throughout its ranks gave great rewards and treasures to those willing to distinguish themselves on the battlefield. They had their honorary crowns for acts of bravery, granting great privileges for soldiers that could never have been imagined by such low-born men at the start of their lives. Senators of noble birth would rise to greet them at public games, by no choice of their own, but through enforced appreciation of warfare and bravery. Military service and the cult that surrounded it was what built the empire. I have a podcast on my channel going into more details about such crowns and the history of the Roman military cult if you're interested. For now though, I'd like us to solely focus on the Spolia Opima. It is likely the most rarely granted honour in all Roman history, the tradition being birthed when Romulus, the first king and great founder of Rome, dispatched Acron, king of the Seninsae, during a fierce battle in Rome's mythical early history. He would grant mercy to the settlement's inhabitants, but destroy their treacherous town and bring the occupants back to Rome as equal citizens. He would then conduct the first of the 3 Spolia Opima ceremonies. Plutarch describes the events as follows, quote, Romulus, after considering how he might perform his vow in a manner most acceptable to Jupiter and accompany the performance with a spectacle most pleasing to the citizens, cut down a monstrous oak that grew in the camp, hewed it into the shape of a trophy, and fitted and fastened it to the armour of Acron, each piece in its due order. Then he himself, girding his raiment about him and wreathing his flowing locks with laurel, set the trophy on his right shoulder, where it was held erect, and began a triumphal march leading off in a song of victory, which his army sang as it followed under arms, and being received by the citizens with joyful amazement. The procession was the origin and model of all subsequent triumphs, and the trophy was stylized a dedication to Jupiter Feretrius, so named after the Roman word ferile, to smite, for Romulus vowed to smite his foe and overthrow him, and such spoils were called opima, because as Varro says, opus is the Roman word for richness, but it would be more plausible to say that they were so called from the deed of valour involved, since opus is the Roman word for deed or exploit, and only to a general who with his own hand had performed the exploit of slaying an opposing general has the privilege of dedicating the Spolia Opima been granted. The victorious Roman would take the armour of his slain counterpart and then mount it on a shaped piece of wood, so that the armour sat in full display, akin to how it would when worn on the human body. He would then take these belongings to the temple of Jupiter, mounting them within the temple to be kept as a permanent sign of the warrior's dedication to the god. In Romulus's case, as the legend goes, the armour from Acron was mounted in the temple of Jupiter Feretrius, the first ever temple built in Rome. From Romulus giving birth to the ceremony to the next claimant of the Spolia Opima, over 300 years would pass, Romulus claimed his prize in the year of 752 BC. The great honour was not witnessed again until after the Battle of Fidenae in 437 BC. More than 300 years of Roman history had ebbed from the Tiber into the Great Sea of the past. Rome was no longer a kingdom, but an early republic. No longer did kings rule the Romans. The last man to hold that title, Tarquin the Proud, had been exiled. Now Rome was governed by a senate, with 2 men chosen from within these ranks to rule in coalition for a year. The balance of power now spread across the senate and exerted through the consuls. No singular man could act tyrannically without checks and balances, or at least it would be harder, or so the theory went. As we know though, the republic would not last, just as the kingdom had not, and the empire would fare no more favourably. Aulus Cornelius Cossus was the second Roman in history to complete the great Spolia Opima, and since Romulus is more myth than material, most likely Cossus was the first man to claim this trophy at all. He would also play a large role in the politics of this tradition, and even be invoked by Caesar Augustus in the denying of another infamous Roman this great honour. Staying with Cossus though, it was in the year 437 BC that the great act would take place. Rome was still a small republic, similar to that of a small city-state, trying to exert authority over her small universe of hills and valleys, not yet the behemoth she would later become. Rome's adversaries in this case were not enemy civilizations from across the globe, but merely their neighbouring towns and settlements. The scale of Rome's power was very much still in doubt, and a town under their control had revolted, allying with 2 Etruscan cities in their bid to establish themselves as the preeminent power in the region. The Falerii and the Veii would unite with this rebellious colony at the Battle of Fidenae, named after the revolting town in question of Fidenae. The ante had been upped by Lars Ptolemus, king of the Veii, who ordered the murder of 4 Roman dignitaries sent to the town to try and establish a line of communication and broker a treaty. There would be no going back from here. To kill an envoy or dignitary was the most heinous of crimes in the ancient world, breaking the very laws of nations that the Romans used to govern these conflicts. Rome would elect 2 consuls and meet the combined force under the command of Lars Ptolemus. The battle would be hard fought. Livy writes, quote, "The victory gained was by no means a bloodless one. There was more mourning for their countrymen who were lost than joy over the defeat of the enemy." End quote. After such a hard-fought and costly victory, Rome would do what was done in true times of crisis. They elected a dictator. Like the old days of the Roman kingdom, once more putting the trust of their society within the hands of one man. This role was reanimated only during true times of strife. The role of the dictator existed solely to complete one singular task, to save Rome from the precipice of disaster, or at least that is how it operated in the earlier parts of the Republic. No interest was given to tax rates or grain rations, just the preservation of society. Once this great task was complete, the role of dictator would once again recede back into the dusty folds of the senatorial toga. The dictator would not act as a king, however. He would still be held accountable for actions when in office, and was under the scrutiny of the Senate. But let's just say a lot of the yellow tape and restrictions placed on a consul would be lifted, for a dictator to complete his sole purpose, to return Rome to its rightful status quo. The elected dictator in this case was Marcus Aemilius, who would be chosen from within the ranks of the senatorial elite to reprise this role on 3 occasions across his lifetime. Its importance as a position would wane over the years, and would often be enacted in the later Republic as a tool of conducting elections without the presence of a consul, especially in times of war. This use of the role was enacted 12 times during the First Punic War between Rome and Carthage. It was not Marcus, however, that claimed the great Spolia Opima. As Livy tells the tale, the Romans had reached the town of Fidenae, which was located not 10 kilometers north of the Eternal City. There, the Roman army would find their combined foe camped outside the walls of the town. The combined enemy army had diverging opinions on the tactical approach to take against the Romans. In the end, the combined leader and king of the Veii would organise his army outside the walled town and prepare for battle. Once the 2 forces engaged, the battle seemed evenly fought. The king Lars Ptolemus, who was in charge of a large cavalry detachment, was putting up the most resistance against the Roman push. As Lars stood proud riding in front of his men, shouting and whooping encouragement at them during this bloody battle, Livy describes the events as follows. Quote, "There was in the cavalry on that day a military tribune named A. Cornelius Cossus, a remarkably handsome man, and equally distinguished for strength and courage, and proud of his family name, which, illustrious as it was when he inherited it, was rendered more so when he left it to his posterity. When he saw the Roman squadron shaken by the repeated charges of Ptolemaeus in whatever direction he rode, and recognised him as he galloped along the entire line, conspicuous in his royal habiliments, he exclaimed, Is this the breaker of treaties between man and man, the violator of the law of nations? If it is the will of heaven that anything holy should exist on earth, I will slay this man and offer him as a sacrifice to the manes of the murdered envoys." Putting spurs to his horse, he charged with levelled spear against this single foe, and having struck and unhorsed him, he leaped with the aid of his spear to the ground. As the king was attempting to rise, he pushed him back with the boss of his shield, and with repeated spear thrusts, pinned him to the earth. Then he despoiled the lifeless body, and cutting off his head, stuck it on his spear, and carrying it in triumph routed the enemy, who were panic-struck at the king's death. Livy then goes on to describe the return of Cossus to Rome and the second half of this quest. Quote, "Successful in all directions, the dictator returned home to enjoy the honour of a triumph, granted him by decree of the Senate and resolution of the people. By far the finest sight in the procession was Cossus, bearing the Spolia Opima of the king he had slain. The soldiers sang rude songs in his honour and placed him on a level with Romulus. He solemnly dedicated the spoils to Jupiter Feretrius and hung them in his temple near those of Romulus, which were the only ones which at that time were called Spolia Opima Prima. All eyes were turned from the chariots of the dictator to him. He almost monopolised the honour of the day." So great and rare was this honour that even a dictator's triumph, what was the highest and most desired prize in the elite lives of the Roman aristocracy, was cast into the shadow by Cossus and his grand achievement. For his display of bravery, martial prowess and dedication to the gods, his name is remembered above so many other great Romans of both the Republic and the Empire. His memory and reputation is just another cultural reinforcement of a militant society. To inspire those attributes desired for the best outcome of the Republic, who would not want men in their fighting force who knew that acts of unmatched bravery, skill and a willingness to die for the Republic could grant their name eternal honour, and if they lived to tell the tale, rewards that would change a man's fortune forever? From Cossus carving himself into Rome's marbled history to the third and final recognised entry in this most prestigious of lists, 215 years would pass. We now find Rome as a strong and growing power. The year is 222 BC and Rome is just a few years away from the Second Punic War. This war against Carthage and their great general Hannibal Barca would stretch Rome to its limits, but would solidify their position as the dominant force in the Mediterranean. Although Rome had this bubbling problem in the south ready to boil over, their northern frontiers were rarely quiet. Led by the Insubrians, a tribe of Gauls from northern Italy, they had declared war on Rome in 225 BC. Two consuls had gone north and crushed a large insurrection with a force of over 20,000 men. The following events are always fascinating when reading of the Roman past. Plutarch reports after the Roman victory there were sightings of 3 moons in the night sky at Irinium. This led to the augurs claiming that the two consuls had been unduly and inauspiciously elected. The Senate therefore immediately recalled the 2 men. One of the consuls, wanting to secure loot and victory, refused to open the letter, however, and continued on his task to ravage the enemy and gain spoils. When the army arrived back in Rome with visions of glory and triumphs, the citizens refused to greet them in the streets, and the Senate stripped the 2 consuls of their rank, reducing them to private citizens. Here is Plutarch speaking of the importance behind the adherence to these religious traditions. Quote, "So much were all things at Rome made to depend upon religion, they would not allow any contempt of the omens and the ancient rites, even though attended with the highest success, thinking it to be of more importance to the public safety that the magistrates should reverence the gods than that they should overcome their enemies." End quote. These are always interesting accounts, firstly due to the absolute nature of the adherence and the refusal to deviate. I've seen accounts of consuls stripped of their rank due to not holding entrails correctly in ceremonies, or ceremonial hats falling off their heads. All these instances signs from the gods that it is not that man's time to fulfill the honorary position of consul. But also parts of Plutarch's writings tend to have a certain flair to them. Important themes of the old republic and their adherence to the true religious ways of life, their moral superiority perhaps to the Romans that lived in Plutarch's time, in a later Roman society of more perceived debauchery and corruption. Many writers you will find, even in the late Republic and early Empire, reaffirm the same themes of Roman glory with an almost mythological tint, certain writers adding their own accounts and additions as the time passes. We will mention that a bit more in conclusion though. With the 2 consuls disgraced after their return to Rome and delaying tactics with the letters from the Senate, we meet our final great man. Marcus Claudius Marcellus was known as the Sword of Rome. He was a crucial leader in the Second Punic War and was even reputed to be feared by Hannibal. He had a reputation surpassed by few in this period of history. He was the epitome of what it was to be a Roman icon. He was fierce in battle, cunning, and smart, yet he held a reputation of learning, writing, and appreciation of those Greek scholars that was expected to be shown by the Roman governing class, but it was truly his love of warfare, unmatched fighting ability, and seemingly maniacal obsession with battle that earned him the reputation he holds above many of his contemporaries. Plutarch, writing in 75 AD, describes Marcellus as follows, quote, "They say that Marcus Claudius, who was 5 times consul of the Romans, was the son of Marcus, and that he was the first of his family called Marcellus. He was indeed by long experience skillful in the art of war, of a strong body, valiant of hand, and by natural inclinations addicted to war. This high temper and heat he showed conspicuously in battle. In other respects he was modest and obliging. Marcellus, ignorant or unskillful of no kind of fighting, in single combat surpassed himself. He never declined a challenge, and never accepted without killing his challenger. In Sicily he protected and saved his brother Otilicus when surrounded in battle, and slew the enemies that pressed upon him, for which acts he was by the generals, while he was yet but young, presented with crowns and other honourable rewards, and, his good qualities more and more displaying themselves, he was created curule aedile by the people and by the high priest's augur. Marcellus had just been elected consul alongside Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus, uncle of the great Scipio Africanus. Marcellus, after rallying the Romans into a fever pitch of war, his true love, was blocked by an apparent peace offer by the Gessete and their king Britomartus. Rome tentatively agreed to this treaty, but before long, though the Gauls had started raiding Roman allies once again, Marcellus, elected consul and a man of warfare and reverence, was well aware of the Spolia Optima, and a burning desire rested within him to claim this great honour. Plutarch writes that on being given permission to conclude this war and punish the Gessete for their raiding and oath-breaking tendencies, Marcellus took a smaller part of his army and rushed north to help the city of Acerne that was under attack. He took 2/3 of his cavalry and 600 light-armed foot. Plutarch describes the following scene, quote, "Nor had he time to refresh his soldiers or give them rest, for the barbarians that were there present immediately observed his approach, and contempted him because he had very few foot with him. The Gauls were singularly skillful in horsemanship and thought to excel in it, and as at present they also exceeded Marcellus in number. They made no account of him. They therefore, with their king at their head, instantly charged upon him, as if they would trample him under their horses' feet, threatening all kinds of cruelties. Marcellus, because his men were few, that they might not be encompassed and charged on all sides by the enemy, extended his wings of horse, and riding about drew out his wings of foot in length, till he came near to the enemy. Just as he was in the act of turning round to face the enemy, it so happened that his horse, startled with their fierce look and their cries, gave back and carried him forcibly aside. Fearing lest this accident, if converted into an omen, might discourage his soldiers, he quickly brought his horse round to confront the enemy, and made a gesture of adoration to the sun, as if he had wheeled about not by chance, but for a purpose of devotion, for it was customary for the Romans when they offered worship to the gods to turn around, and in this moment of meeting the enemy, he is said to have vowed the best of the arms to Jupiter Feretrius. The king of the Gauls, beholding Marcellus, and from the badges of his authority conjecturing him to be the general, advanced some way before his embattled army, and with a loud voice challenged him, and, brandishing his lance, fiercely ran in full career at him, exceeding the rest of the Gauls in stature, and with his armour, that was adorned with gold and silver and various colours, shining like lightning. These arms seeming to Marcellus, while he viewed the enemy's army drawn up in battalia, to be the best and fairest, and thinking them to be those he had vowed to Jupiter, he instantly ran upon the king, and pierced through his breastplate with his lance, then pressing upon him with the weight of his horse, threw him to the ground, and with 2 or 3 more strokes slew him. Immediately he leapt from his horse, laid his hand upon the dead king's arm, and looking up towards heaven thus spoke, O Jupiter Feretrius, arbiter of the exploits of captains and of acts of commanders in war and battles, be thou witness that I, a general, have slain a general, I, a consul, have slain a king with my own hand, third of all the Romans, and that to thee I consecrate these first and most excellent of the spoils. Grant to us to dispatch the relics of the war with the same course of fortune. Then the Roman horse, joining the battle not only with the enemy's horse, but also with the foot who attacked them, obtained a singular and unheard of victory. For never before or since have so few a horse defeated such numerous forces of horse on foot together. The great sword of Rome, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, had now added himself as the third and final occupant of this legendary list. The importance of Marcellus's winning of the Spolia Opima is often cited as the most important, Being the most recent and most well documented, none of the Romans of this period had seen this prize ever won. It was an honour almost forgotten, a myth of the times of Rome's inception and great rise. Marcellus made it real once more. To be able to confidently put yourself in the same conversation as the great founder of your civilization is an accomplishment hardly imagined in the mind of men. The truth is, though, that the lines are blurred between fact and fiction with all of these accounts. Obviously Romulus is myth, but certain earlier accounts of even the other two men have some critics speculate around accuracy and consistency. There is a high chance they are all myth. But as history records it, 3 times armour was placed in the temple of Jupiter for Etrius. The first was Romulus, the second was Cossus, and the third was Marcellus. No man would again claim it. The tradition would die with Augustus's forming of the empire, and the absolute power exerted through the emperor would mean the tradition would be lost. There were other Romans who killed enemy generals or kings in single combat and claimed their spoils, but their lack of total authority over the army denied them the ability to be awarded their desired prize. Nero Claudius Drusus, brother of Emperor Tiberius and father to both Germanicus and Emperor Claudius, was a man who died before his rise to true Roman greatness, but rumours swirled around his desire to claim the Spolia, hunting Germanic kings in a series of wars through Western Europe. That is a subject I may delve into in the future and explore the lives of those great men that missed out on the prize due to technicalities but not due to a lack of total bravery. For now though, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. Please like the video, it really does help out, and subscribe if you'd enjoy more videos like this. Thank you very much.